back to my high school days. While everyone was admiring the beautiful class flower, with her slim waist and long legs, I, on the other hand, had my eyes on the invisible classmate, the one whom all the boys avoided, not because he would become the recognized class flower at the graduation party, but because I didn't want to miss out on a girl who would be willing to sacrifice everything for me. In my past life, although I became a top-tier entrepreneur, I never expected that after one drunken night, I would die in a car accident. It wasn't until the doctor prepared my body for cremation that a woman suddenly stumbled into the ward. She trembled as she approached, shaking all over. Step by step, she moved toward my lifeless body. Tears silently streamed down her cheeks. When she finally reached the bedside, she shakily lifted the cloth covering me, and her body suddenly collapsed as if it had lost all support, falling to the floor. In that moment, I felt an overwhelming sadness from her. But who was this woman? In my spiritual state, I couldn't remember anything about the woman in front of me. The doctor, finally processing what was happening, asked the question I was thinking. The woman slowly turned her head, wiped away her tears, and forced herself to stand. She weakly smiled. I am his lover. Lover, I was stunned. I had never married in my life. When did I have a lover? The woman seemed unwilling to explain much further. His voice carried a plea. Can you help me with the funeral? Everyone present, including the Sue family, was moved by his sincerity. The doctor thought for a moment and nodded in agreement. I, floating in the air, was utterly shocked. He actually wants to arrange a funeral for me. The next 2 days, I followed behind the woman, watching him finish the funeral. And that night, in the empty rental house, he cried all night, hugging his fragile body. When the morning light came, he took a wish bottle to the river bank. He treasured the candy wrapper in his hand, caressing it gently. Then he raised his hand, letting the candy wrapper fly as the paper fell into the water with the wind. Linjo, have you forgotten me? I am Sunyanku. Upon hearing that, my body trembled. It was him, the Sunyanku I remembered from before. So different from the woman standing before me now. It was the year of senior high school. Sunyanku had just transferred to our school. He became my deskmate because of his frailty and timidity. He was also known as one of the 5 little ducks. However, at that time, I was to focus on chasing the school belle, Yunru Oxy. I would prepare various milk candies that he liked every day. Once, after making Yunru Oxy angry, she outright rejected my offering. But to my surprise, those were the very candies I later threw at Sunyanku. He had kept them all this time. These candies, you gave them to me. Do you know? It was these little candies that saved my life. Without you, I would have died long ago. I kept thinking that once I could catch up to you, I would confess my feelings to you. But how could you die? How could you not even give me a chance? Sunyanku's voice was filled with sorrow. As he spoke, he suddenly started laughing. But it doesn't matter anymore. I'm coming to join you. I realized what he was about to do. I screamed hysterically. But the woman couldn't hear my cries at all. She took a slow step forward, a single tear slipping from the corner of her eye. Linjo, in our next life, can you look at me just once more? With those words, she jumped into the icy lake without hesitation. Yet when I opened my eyes again, I had returned to the day of Bayu's memorial ceremony. It was also on this day that I held a bouquet of flowers, preparing to confess my feelings to the school beauty I had liked for 3 years. But after publicly rejecting my confession, she turned around and threw herself into the arms of a wealthy second-generation heir. However, after everything I had experienced in my past life, how could I possibly repeat the same mistakes? So without hesitation, I took the bouquet in my arms and handed it to my homeroom teacher instead. Before Zhang Shuki could react, I quickly turned and stepped down from the podium. Meanwhile, Yunru Oxy, watching the scene unfold, stared at me in utter disbelief. Linjo, what is the meaning of this? That bouquet of flowers, was it really not meant for her? Did he truly have no intention of confessing to her today? How could this be possible? As Jong Shuki rambled on in shock, the oath-taking ceremony officially came to an end. On the way back to the classroom, I clearly remembered. It was during this very lesson that Sunyanku was brought to class and became my deskmate, a girl who had liked me for many, many years, who was willing to love me with all her heart. This time, I didn't want to miss my chance. After returning to the classroom, the sound of the class bell rang out. At that moment, our homeroom teacher stepped into the room, her high heels clicking against the floor, and behind her followed a girl so thin she seemed as fragile as a piece of paper. Today, our class welcomes a new transfer student. Her name is Sunyanku. Everyone give her a warm round of applause. Sunyanku stood nervously at the podium, introducing herself in a timid voice. Then, the teacher assigned her to the seat beside me. I watched as she walked over, tentatively stretching out her foot as if testing the ground. Asked, "Sorry, classmate, is this the right seat?" "Yes, this will be your seat from now on." "Hello, classmate. I'm your new deskmate, Linjo." Thank you," Sunyanku stammered nervously, then cautiously took a seat. She opened her worn-out school bag, pulled out a stack of books, then took out a notebook. Silently preparing to focus on the lesson, I rummaged through my desk and pulled out a test paper covered in red X's. For a moment, I felt a wave of emotion. My grades were truly terrible. Only 100 days left. Would I even be able to improve? Just then, I suddenly felt a faint gaze, sneaking subtle glances in my direction. I turned my head, only to see Sunyanku hurriedly retract her gaze in panic. She lowered her head, scribbling and doodling on a scrap piece of paper. It seemed like this girl didn't have yesterday's test paper, but judging from her expression, she probably wanted to borrow mine to take a look. Yet she was too shy to ask. This girl was the epitome of social anxiety. I sighed internally at the thought. Then, I deliberately shifted my test paper toward the middle of our shared desk. Sunyanku's eyes lit up as if she had just discovered a new continent, a small smile appearing on her face. But mere moments later, I noticed my little deskmate frowning. She seemed utterly perplexed, probably wondering why my test paper was covered in red X's. At that moment, I wanted nothing more than to crawl into a hole. But first, I needed to think of a way to actually start improving my grades. The moment class ended, my little deskmate darted out of the room. I also got up, planning to go to the restroom and maybe see where she had gone. Just then, my good friend Liu Shiming noticed and quickly caught up to me. Following my gaze, he realized I was staring at my new deskmate. His expression immediately changed. "Joje, are you moving on to someone else?" After all, since the beginning of middle school, I had always sworn that I would marry Yun Ruoxi or no one else. Hearing this, I shot Liu Shiming a sideways glance. "Speak properly. What do you mean moving on? This is called finding the right path." Cutting my losses in time, Liu Shiming looked at me as if he had just seen a ghost. "No way, you're not actually into Sunyanku, are you?" I didn't bother answering his question. Instead, I simply nodded. Watching Sunyanku's figure grow smaller in the distance, I fell into deep thought. I realized there was a major drawback to my rebirth. It seemed that, aside from discovering that Sunyanku had feelings for me, I knew absolutely nothing else. With that thought, I threw an arm around Liu Shiming's shoulder. "I heard you have a few buddies over at Second High. I need you to do something for me." "What is it?" "Help me look into Sunyanku." Sunyanku had transferred from Lijiang High, but with college entrance exams right around the corner, why would she suddenly transfer to First High? I felt like I needed to understand this better. Meanwhile, Yun Ruoxi was walking toward the restroom, her head lowered as if she had lost her soul. "Linjo, what the hell is going on?" An entire class period had passed. By now, Linjo should have come to explain himself. What was he doing? Why hadn't he shown up yet? Just as she was lost in thought, she suddenly heard Liu Shiming's voice. Yun Ruoxi lifted her head, only to see Liu Shiming standing with me. Ignoring Liu Shiming completely, she called out excitedly, "Lin Zhou." I immediately wiped the smile from my face. "You two talk, I'm heading back to class." Having lived through a second life, I had no desire to get entangled with Yun Ruoxi again. Yun Ruoxi stood frozen in place, her eyes filled with disbelief as she looked at me. "Lin Zhou, what's wrong with you?" I replied calmly, "I'm perfectly fine. But... Yun Ruoxi seemed flustered, her voice growing anxious. She wanted to say something, but Liu Shiming was still here. Seeing this, I looked at Yun Ruoxi with a serious expression and said, "If you have something to say, just say it. Liu Shiming isn't an outsider." Hearing my words, Yun Ruoxi's voice wavered with nervousness. "Lin Zhou, aren't you going to give me an explanation? This morning, the roses were obviously meant for me. Why did you give them to Zhang Shuqi instead?" I stared at her in disbelief. Since when were beauties this narcissistic? Though coming from Yun Ruoxi, it wasn't exactly surprising. "Who said they were for you?" "They were for the teachers." Yun Ruoxi clearly didn't believe me. "That's impossible. Weren't you going to confess to me?" "And how do you know I was going to confess to you? Did I tell you that in advance? You confessed to me every week before. It's already been 2 weeks this time." "So what?" "So that means you were going to confess again today, right?" "Yun Ruoxi, I think people really shouldn't overthink things too much. Yes, I liked you back then. But now, I don't like you anymore. And I never will again. From today onward, you take your path of glory. I'll walk my own solitary bridge. Bye-bye." With that, I grabbed Liu Shiming and strode off toward the classroom. Yun Ruoxi stood frozen in place, her eyes filled with utter disbelief. The moment I stepped into the classroom, I saw that my little deskmate had already returned to her seat. I quickly returned to my seat, preparing for class. Sunyanku looked around in confusion as the other students took out their test papers, seemingly at a loss. When she noticed me, she instinctively shrank back. Her mind was still filled with the conversation she had accidentally overheard in the bathroom stall. Why did the teacher assign the transfer student to sit next to Lin Zhou today? That Lin Zhou is a school bully. He's already scared away several of his deskmates. Sunyanku's thoughts were in chaos. Was her new deskmate really that bad? But last class, she had secretly glanced at his test paper, and he was even discussing study materials with someone. The contradiction made her shiver. No wonder the moment class ended, he left with his friend from across the hallway. Was he planning to mess with her? Back at second high, her classmates used to trick her like this too. Just as she was lost in thought, she saw me pull out my test paper from my desk and glance at her. "Let's review together," I said. Sunyanku froze for a moment, instinctively shrinking back even more. And no need. I was curious. What had happened over a single break to make my little deskmate even more timid? Eventually, her resolve to study overcame her fear. She cautiously inched closer to me. But before she could even read a single word, I quickly withdrew my test paper. "You can look," I said, "but under one condition." Sunyanku blinked in confusion. Didn't he just say we'd review together? Sunyanku's mind was instantly flooded with countless memories of being bullied. Nervously, she shut her eyes tight. I won't look anymore." Instead of insisting, I simply handed her a handful of white rabbit milk candies. "Throw these away for me. The trash can is closer to you." Sunyanku let out a startled gasp, unable to believe what she just heard. "Throw them away? That's it? I brought too many today. I can't finish them." Sunyanku gave me a skeptical glance, but I seemed genuinely indifferent. She lowered her head, staring at the candies. She couldn't help herself. She had to say something. "These candies are perfectly fine. It's such a waste." That was exactly the response I had been waiting for. In my previous life, It was on this very day that I had given these milk candies to Sunyanku. Back then, after my confession at the oath-taking ceremony was rejected, Yunruoxi ignored me for the entire morning. Naturally, no one wanted the candies I had in my pocket. Frustrated and annoyed, every time I touched them, I was reminded of how Yunruoxi had rejected me. So in a fit of irritation, I grabbed the candies, walked to the trash can, and that was when I heard, for the very first time since I had known her, Sunyanku's voice. "Classmate, no, you can't waste them." Caught off guard, I tossed the candies to her instead. "Then you deal with them." After that, I dragged Liu Shiming along and skipped class to go to an internet cafe. So in my previous life, I never knew. Why had these milk candies saved Sunyanku's life? Since they were life-saving, they must have held immense significance for her. In this life, I could only find an excuse to give them to her. Then just eat them. Eat them. I don't want them anymore. You won't let me throw them away. If you don't eat them, who will? Sunyanku hesitated for a moment, then carefully tucked the candies into her desk. Satisfied that my plan had worked, I stopped bothering her and focused on the lesson. The morning passed in a blur. As soon as class ended, Liu Shiming was already pulling me toward the cafeteria. But after taking just a couple of steps, I noticed that Sunyanku hadn't moved. She didn't even seem to have any intention of grabbing a lunchbox. Instead, she sat there, her head lowered, flipping through her textbook. I paused. "Hey, little deskmate. Aren't you coming to eat?" Sunyanku startled, snapping her head up in surprise. I'll go later." "Alright, then I'll go first." I didn't think too much about it. After all, she was extremely shy. Even talking made her nervous. Maybe she just didn't like fighting for food when the cafeteria was crowded. Maybe she preferred eating alone. I figured I'd bring her along once we got more familiar. With Liu Shiming urging me along, we headed straight to the cafeteria. Well, we ate. The results of the task I'd given Liu Shiming came in surprisingly fast. Speaking of which, Liu Shiming leaned in, intrigued. "This Sunyanku man, she's had it rough. I heard from someone at her old school that she was a top student, but her family's financial situation is really bad. So poor that she couldn't even afford her tuition. Sometimes, she didn't even have enough to eat. But because she was timid by nature, she became an easy target for school bullies. As a result, Sunyanku was often harassed. Eventually, she couldn't take it anymore. She dropped out, and only with the help of her homeroom teacher was she able to transfer to our school." I frowned as I listened. "Poor and bullied," Liu Shiming continued. "She's from a remote mountain village, and from what I heard, her parents aren't around anymore. Her grandparents have been raising her and her younger brother, trying to get them through school. But just recently, her grandfather went up the mountain to gather herbs to sell for money, and ended up breaking his leg. Their only source of income is gone now." I shot up from my seat, striding toward the exit. Liu Shiming jumped in shock. "Joje, where are you going?" "You stay here and wait for me. I'll be back soon." Leaving the cafeteria, I headed straight for the classroom. I stopped by the back door, peeking inside quietly. And there she was, Sunyanku, sitting still at her desk. She was fiddling with something in her hands, her expression serious. I squinted, trying to get a better look. It was a few pieces of white rabbit milk candy. Was she really planning to eat just that for lunch? Just as the thought crossed my mind, I saw Sunyanku stand up, attempting to walk outside. But after just 2 steps, her legs gave out beneath her, and she nearly collapsed onto the floor. My little deskmate gripped the table for support, then sank down into my seat, lightly patting her head with her hand. Perhaps she was trying to ease her dizziness. I clenched my fists tightly. At this moment, I finally understood the meaning behind Sunyanku's words when she said these candies had saved her life. Her current state. It was clear that she had gone too long without eating. Malnutrition had led to low blood sugar. And the reason she was so thin was undoubtedly because of this. Right now, I wanted nothing more than to rush in and tell her to stop doing this to herself. But I knew Sunyanku was stubborn. If I barged in directly, it would only crush the last bit of dignity she had left. Worse, she might end up distancing herself from me even more. I clenched my fists once again, then turned around and headed back to the cafeteria. Liu Shiming had already finished eating. Seeing me return, he quickly stood up. "Zhou, hurry up and eat. I already finished mine." I didn't respond. I sat down, but my mind was a mess. I couldn't comprehend how fate could be so cruel. Why did a girl like her have to endure all of this? I couldn't even begin to imagine how Sunyanku had made it through in my past life. Lowering my head, I forced myself to shove a few bites of food into my mouth, all while thinking about what I needed to do next. After finishing my meal, I stood up and walked toward the food counter. Liu Shiming stared at me in shock as I bought a chicken leg, a piece of bread, and a carton of milk. He was utterly dumbfounded. "Zhou, you're still not full?" I glanced back at him. "Fatty, do me a favor." At this moment, Sunyanku had already been sitting for quite a while. His classmates were returning one after another. Only then did he feel that his dizziness had somewhat subsided. Today was his first day attending First High School. Although the teacher had promised to help him reduce tuition fees and even apply for financial aid, it would still take a few days for the application to be approved. He only had 10 yuan left, given to him by his grandmother before he left. He had no idea how long he could last with that. So Sunyanku set a goal for himself. Before the financial aid arrived, he would only eat 1 meal a day. At noon, he felt he could still endure it. So he didn't go to eat. But he hadn't expected his low blood sugar to act up again. Luckily, his deskmate had given him some milk candies. His deskmate said these candies could help alleviate low blood sugar. Unable to resist, he ate one. Sure enough, he felt much better. This deskmate, though seemingly a bit wasteful, didn't seem as bad as others had said. Besides, these candies had just saved his life. What kind of person was this deskmate really? Why did they seem completely different from what others had described? They were also entirely unlike anyone he had met before. Not at all like those he had known in the past. Just as he was lost in thought, Sunyanku heard my voice from the doorway. "Fatty Liu, I already told you I can't finish it all, yet you insisted on buying so much. Now look! What do we do now?" As they spoke, the two of them walked up to Sunyanku. Sunyanku glanced at the things I was holding in my hands. He swallowed involuntarily. His stomach began to rumble. Sunyanku hurriedly pressed his stomach with both hands, afraid that anyone might hear. He wanted to endure a little longer. By evening, he could go to the cafeteria and grab something to eat. Just as he was thinking about it, a large drumstick suddenly appeared in front of him. Sunyanku froze for a moment. Looking up, he saw me placing the food on his desk. Casually, I said, "Hey, throw these away for me, will you?" "Again?" "Yeah, I can't finish it anyway." Sunyanku hesitated. He wanted to tell me to keep it for later, but kids from well-off families like me would never eat leftovers. Just as he was at a loss, he heard me speak again. "If you think it's wasteful, just help me eat it instead. I really can't eat anymore." Sunyanku looked up at me in shock. "Why not?" "Just think of it as doing me another favor. If my dad finds out I keep wasting food, I'll get a beating." But before Sunyanku could react, he saw me swiftly tearing open the packaging, then handing the bread right in front of him. "Stop hesitating. Just eat." Sunyanku's eyes widened in disbelief. "Thanks, little deskmate." Taking the opportunity, I pinched his cheek, then withdrew my hand with a chuckle. Flustered, Sunyanku hurriedly took the bread out of his mouth. But he knew it was too late to return it now. Lowering his head quickly, he tried to hide his already burning red face. "It should be me thanking you instead," he murmured. Saying that, he took a small bite of the bread. For the first time, Sunyanku felt an overwhelming sense of satisfaction. I watched him eat so earnestly and couldn't help but smile. Seeing him focused on his meal, I pulled out the test paper I had been reviewing at noon and dove back into studying. There were only 100 days left until the college entrance exam. After studying for a while, I decided to check if my little deskmate had finished eating. The moment I turned my head, I saw Sunyanku carefully tucking away the drumstick and milk. Was this kid planning to save it for dinner? That won't do. I had specifically bought something nutritious to help him recover. Little deskmate. Sunyanku, who was in the middle of stashing away the drumstick, flinched. Huh, is the drumstick not tasty? No, it's delicious. Then why aren't you eating it? Seeing his hesitation, I urged him again, hurry up and eat. Left with no choice, Sunyanku took the drumstick out again and started nibbling on it bit by bit. Seizing the opportunity, I grabbed the milk next to him and opened it. Here, drink some. Careful not to choke. Sunyanku took the milk from me and gulped it down in big sips. Watching him puff up his cheeks as he drank, I couldn't help but smile in satisfaction. I had to admit, now that I looked at him properly, my little deskmate was surprisingly pleasant to look at. Such a pity he was so skinny. Once he gained some weight, he'd definitely be even more stunning than Tan Roxy. With that thought, I refocused on my studies. But now, this final problem on the test paper. I couldn't quite understand it. Just as I was wondering what to do, I heard my little deskmate whisper beside me. This problem should be solved like this. He took out his pen, then pulled out a sheet of paper and carefully began writing down the solution. I looked at my little deskmate's side profile, unable to stop myself from smiling. No one knew that beneath those thick bangs hid a face that could astonish the world. Lin Zhou suddenly realized I was watching him. Sunyanku's face turned a shade of red so faint it was barely noticeable. Are you watching me solve the problem? Oh yes, I'm watching, keep going. I kept my gaze fixed, staring directly at Sunyanku's face. His racing heart gradually steadied a little. He continued writing earnestly. Once he finished, Sunyanku handed the sheet of paper to me, whispering, "Here. If you don't understand anything, just ask me." I nodded, reaching out to take it. Alright, then you continue eating slowly. But the moment our fingertips brushed, Sunyanku flinched and quickly withdrew his hand, lowering his head, not daring to look at me again. His heart was pounding. Thump. He felt like he was going to lose his mind. What was happening? Not only had his deskmate pinched his cheek today, but now their hands had touched too. Even if it wasn't intentional, he had never been touched by anyone before. Face burning, Sunyanku wished he could find a hole to crawl into. Afternoon classes soon began. As Zhang Shuqi walked in, the class monitor immediately stood up. The homework from the day before yesterday, there are still a few people who haven't turned it in. Zhang the taskmaster had always had a strict rule. If you didn't do your homework, you had to copy it outside the classroom. 10 times, no exceptions, no food until you finished. Standing at the podium, Zhang Shuqi spread out the test papers and spoke. Really, who hasn't turned it in? Just the ones at the back. Like Lin Zhou and Liu Shimin. Zhang Shuqi adjusted his glasses. Today, his attention seemed overly fixated on me. For a moment, he didn't even register the other names. Zhou, did you finish your homework? You didn't, did you? Go outside and copy it 10 times. Silently, I stood up, thinking about how to deal with this situation. Beside me, Sunyanku also glanced at me in confusion. So his deskmate wasn't a fan of doing homework? But copying it 10 times as punishment, wasn't that a bit too harsh? As he thought about it, he wasn't sure why. But he cautiously raised his hand. Tay teacher. Zhang Shuqi's gaze landed on him, his tone suddenly softening. Sunyanku, what is it? Sunyanku stood up hesitantly, his voice timid. If someone already knows how to solve all the problems, do they still have to be punished? Wouldn't learning new knowledge be more important? That's how we did it before. As he spoke, his head lowered even further. After all, he wasn't used to drawing attention in a setting like this. It felt as if everyone was staring at him. I stared at him in shock. Then I couldn't help but smile. My little deskmate actually spoke up for me. It seemed that, in his heart, I had started to earn a place. Then I saw Zhang Shuqi nodding. And just like that, I was off the hook. What you said actually makes some sense. Zhang Shuqi never wanted to give up on any student. After sitting back down, a mischievous thought crossed my mind. Little deskmate, thanks for that just now. Perhaps realizing that I was leaning closer, Sunyanku's face turned slightly red. No problem. You helped me too. If not for those candies and food, he might have really fainted today. Or worse, might not have survived at all. Sunyanku felt a deep sense of gratitude. I chuckled lightly. Then can we help each other from now on? Okay, Sunyanku lowered his head even further. For some reason, he felt like I was getting closer and closer. There were plenty of seats on the other side. Why did I have to lean this way? Was one seat really not enough for me? Sunyanku sniffed lightly. A faint vanilla scent lingered in the air around me. It smelled really nice. Realizing that his thoughts were drifting in a strange direction, Sunyanku quickly scooted a little farther away. But as he shifted, he suddenly felt the space beneath him disappear. His heart skipped a beat. Oh no, he was about to fall. Sunyanku squeezed his eyes shut in despair. And at that moment, he felt a firm grip on his arm. I didn't expect my little deskmate to be so easily startled. I was just playing a little joke on him, and he actually fell for it. What a little fool! Luckily, my reflexes were quick enough to catch him. Sunyanku, unaware of my teasing, steadied himself against the desk cautiously, then quickly pulled his arm away from my grasp. After that, he scooted a little closer to me and focused seriously on the lesson. After school in the afternoon, I was called to the office by Zhang Shuqi. I had no idea why he suddenly wanted to see me at this time. But when I arrived, I saw my father standing there as well. After getting lectured by both Zhang Shuqi and my dad, I returned to the classroom. Walking in, I noticed that most of the classmates hadn't come back yet. At the back of the classroom, Sunyanku was sitting all alone, completely by himself. In his right hand, he held a bun already bitten into. Taking a deep breath, I walked over. Before Sunyanku could react, I snatched the bun from his hand and took a bite. Sunyanku's head snapped up in shock, his entire body freezing. I had bitten into the exact same spot he had just eaten from. Tivis, wasn't this what they always called an indirect kiss in TV dramas? Sunyanku didn't even have time to wonder why I had stolen his bun. All he could feel was his cheeks burning up, and his mind exploding in a frenzy. Sunyanku quickly lowered his head, trying to hide his reaction. How could someone just eat a bun that someone else had already bitten into? What was wrong with his deskmate? As if on purpose, I took another bite of the bun and teased, "Why is your face turning red?" Sunyanku immediately buried his head even lower, his entire face practically pressed against the desk. At this moment, he was almost certain his new deskmate was definitely teasing him, but he didn't know how to fight back. After all, his deskmate had been helping him all day. Maybe a little teasing was fine. No, He stammered for a long time, but not a single coherent word came out. Taking a deep breath, he finally regained a bit of composure. Picking up another bun from the side, he handed it to me. "Are you hungry? If you want a bun, I can give you one. You don't have to snatch it. If it's not enough, I can go to the cafeteria and buy more for you." I took the bun without hesitation. "Sorry about that," I grinned. I was really starving. "I just love the cafeteria's buns, but you don't need to buy more. I already have food." As I spoke, I placed my lunchbox on the desk. Then I rummaged through my desk pocket quickly. For compensation, I added, Sunyanku blinked in confusion. He watched as I, like a magician, pulled out a lunchbox and handed it to him. Inside was half a box of white rice and half a box of fragrant braised pork ribs. Sunyanku couldn't help but swallow back his saliva. He quickly turned his head away, avoiding looking at me. Don't want it. That won't do. I ate your bun. And now I'm not even that hungry anymore. I definitely can't finish all of this. If you don't eat it, it'll just go to waste. And if I waste food, I'll get scolded when I go home. You don't want to see me get scolded, right? With that said, I directly shoved the lunchbox into Sunyanku's hands, giving him no chance to refuse. Sunyanku was a bit dazed. He couldn't shake the feeling that his new deskmate was doing this on purpose, but he had no proof. Carefully, he picked up a piece of rib and took a small bite. Sunyanku tried to suppress the flutter in his heart and focused on eating earnestly. As he ate, his gaze occasionally drifted toward me. I was eating too, not even looking at him. They had been sitting together all day, yet this was his first time observing me up close. Today, I had given him food multiple times, even things I probably wouldn't usually share. How could his deskmate be as bad as the teachers and classmates said? He was genuinely kind. Lost in thought, Sunyanku even forgot about his meal. He sat there, holding a spoonful of rice, completely still. Suddenly, a soft chuckle reached his ears. Before he could react, my voice broke through his daze. Snapping back to reality, Sunyanku quickly lowered his head, shoveling the spoonful into his mouth, trying to hide his embarrassment. This is bad, really bad. Oh no, his deskmate had noticed. Sunyanku felt like he was going to lose his mind. His face was burning red, his hands fumbling in panic. And just like that, the full spoonful of rice suddenly missed its mark and smacked right onto his own cheek. Hearing that, my laughter rang out once more. I couldn't help but pull out a tissue and hand it to him. Here, little messy cat, wipe your face. Only then did Sunyanku realize he had rice stuck to his cheek. He immediately wished he could crawl into a hole. The evening self-study session passed by quickly. Since Sunyanku lived in the dorms, I ended up heading home alone. The next day, I got up early and arrived at school on time. As soon as I walked into the classroom, I pulled a handful of big rabbit milk candies from my pocket and handed them to Sunyanku. Morning reading was an English class, but soon I realized a serious problem. I had no idea how to read it. Helpless, I turned to Sunyanku for help. My little deskmate, who was already deep into studying, lifted his head from his textbook. Can you help me again? Sunyanku shuddered slightly. Was he going to make him eat something again? This morning, he had seen me bring a lunchbox. And while yesterday's food was really delicious, and the candies were also really good, he really didn't want to eat every day. I smirked. Not food this time, little deskmate. Then what is it? Sunyanku still looked doubtful. He had a feeling something bizarre was about to happen again. I slid my textbook closer to Sunyanku. I don't know how to read this. Sunyanku put down his own book, pulled mine over. Then just follow me and read along. After class, I set my sights on my little deskmate. Yesterday, I had successfully tricked him into eating 2 meals and 3 handfuls of candy, but today he was clearly wiser. How should I coax him into eating today? Just as I was plotting, Sunyanku suddenly spoke. Lin Zhou, what's up? I have money today. Liu Laoshi gave me 100 yuan this morning, so you don't have to give me food. He also said he'll support me with 100 yuan every month from now on. I'll pay him back once I start earning money after the college entrance exam. Liu Laoshi is really kind, I muttered under my breath. But now, how was I supposed to get close to my little deskmate? What did you say? I said Liu Laoshi is really nice. Yeah, he is. I am going to the cafeteria now. I sighed helplessly, then decided to follow along like a good kid at the cafeteria. I saw my little deskmate head toward window number 2. After buying my own food, I casually walked over to him. Sunyanku was earnestly eating his bun, when suddenly a shadow loomed over him. Before he could even lift his head, I placed an egg and a fried dough stick on his tray. The boss gave me extra food. After the meal, Sunyanku, face flushed red, hurried back to the classroom in a panic. Because Liu Shimin was still eating too slowly, I had no choice but to stay behind and wait for him. By the time Liu Shimin finally finished eating, most of the people in the cafeteria had already left. Just as I was about to get up and leave, I heard a familiar voice calling out from behind me. Lin Zhou! Turning around, I saw Yun Ruoxi standing there, wearing a rabbit-eared hat. It was the very same hat I had given her as a birthday gift. She had never worn it before, but today, for some reason, she had. Do you need something? You were just eating with a girl, she snapped, not waiting for my response. How could you do this? Lin Zhou, you're so immature. Did you think finding another girl to make me jealous would make me talk to you? Keep dreaming. If you keep this up, I'll never speak to you again. Yun Ruoxi couldn't understand. Yesterday, Lin Zhou had given her roses to someone else. Then he had said such cold-hearted words. Yet today, why hadn't he come to apologize? Was it because she had rejected him so many times before? But in those last 6 times, he hadn't even confessed. What exactly was Lin Zhou trying to do? Was he waiting for her to be the first to give in? But she was the school's pride and beauty, the most sought-after girl in the entire school. Countless boys adored her. How could she possibly lower herself to submit to one who already liked her? At last, I understood the meaning behind her words. Remember what you just said? I replied calmly. Don't forget it. And with that, I turned away in one smooth, effortless motion without stopping or looking back. Yun Ruoxi angrily yanked off the hat from her head and hurled it straight at me. Then she glared at my retreating back, eyes wide with frustration. She watched me, but I didn't turn around. A sudden panic surged within her. Lin Zhou, you bastard! Beside her, Li Xiaowan, who had been eating with her, looked a little worried. Then she saw Yun Ruoxi hesitantly crouch down and carefully pick up the very hat she had just thrown away. Li Xiaowan's gaze flickered slightly, but she said nothing. This Yun Ruoxi, she wasn't acting like her usual self. Could it be she had started to like Lin Zhou? Second period in the morning. It was Liu Qingyin's Chinese class. With only 5 minutes left before dismissal, Liu Qingyin stopped lecturing. Instead, he briefly explained that everyone would be assigned into study groups of 4. As expected, I was paired with Sunyanku. The other 2 were my good brother Liu Shimin and a girl from our class. The reason she was included was simple. Qian Guoguo came from an extremely wealthy family. If I wasn't mistaken, this weekend, the Qian family would be hosting a Sunset Glow outdoor social gathering. It was a networking event for retired employees. All the attendees were former high-ranking officials. Was this not a golden opportunity to make money? Of course, that wasn't the only reason I was interested. Qian Guoguo was also a genuinely kind person, carefree and unbothered, always grinning and laughing. Qian Guoguo was a natural-born optimist, completely different from Sunyanku. Maybe, this kind of personality could help ease Sunyanku's social anxiety. After all, my little deskmate deserved to have friends too. So I casually mentioned to Qian Guoguo that I wanted to visit his house this weekend. He blinked blankly and thought for a long moment, then agreed. Lunchtime. Standing in the cafeteria, I looked at the rib lunchbox in my hands, suddenly feeling troubled. Sunyanku had finally started eating on his own. If I showed up in front of him with this meal now, it would feel unnecessary. Just as I was wondering what to do, I spotted Liu Shimin waving his lunchbox frantically in the air. An idea struck me. Without hesitation, I quickly shoved my lunchbox into Liu Shimin's hands. Liu Shimin didn't suspect a thing. His eyes were only focused on the ribs that had suddenly appeared in his lunch. And me? I smoothly took a seat across from Sunyanku. Then, successfully, I placed my chicken leg onto his plate. Sunyanku looked conflicted. What about your ribs? Liu Shimin took them. Sunyanku, still doubtful, hesitantly picked up the chicken leg. But I can eat just fine without this. I don't need a chicken leg. I know! But aren't we supposed to help each other? I like eating vegetables. You like eating meat. Perfect balance, right? I said casually. I reached over and took a bite of bok choy from Sunyanku's plate. He stared at me blankly for a moment, watching as I ate with obvious enjoyment. Seeing that, he had no choice but to lower his head and continue eating. But as I chewed, I fell into deep thought. These past 2 days, I had been too obvious. I needed to figure out a way to openly eat with my little deskmate without making it weird. Just as I was thinking about it, I spotted Chan Guo walking over with his tray of food. A light bulb went off in my head. I called out Chan Guo. He hesitated for a second, but remembering our new group dynamic, he still walked over. Qian, wanna eat with us? We're in the same study group now, after all. We have to work hard together, right? And we shouldn't waste time, even during meals. If we eat together, we can study together too. Doesn't that make sense? Qian Guo, looking completely lost, nodded without thinking. At that moment, Sunyanku, who had been silent all this time, finally lifted his head. He seemed just as confused. Linzhou, I never agreed to this. Oh, but little deskmate, Qian Guo, Liu Shimin, and I all agreed. You're part of our group too. Doesn't that mean the minority follows the majority? Sunyanku frowned, sensing something off. Liu Shimin isn't even here right now. That's fine, my opinion is Liu Shimin's opinion. He wouldn't dare disagree with me. Sunyanku fell silent again, quietly lowering his head. Meanwhile, Chin Guo, who hadn't gotten a word in at all, just stood there, completely stunned. What just happened? He couldn't shake the feeling that he had just been used as a tool. Chin Guo thought about it for a long time, but still couldn't figure it out. In the end, he chose to give up. Evening self-study. Since we had formed study groups, the class monitor allowed each group to sit together for self-study sessions. For the past week, Qian Guo had been drifting through life without much focus. But during every study session, he always saw me and Sunyanku studying seriously. By the weekend, after reluctantly following along for a whole week, Qian Guo finally sighed in relief as he headed home. But as soon as he arrived, he told his parents about me. At first, they were against it. But after some well-executed begging, they finally gave in. The next day, as promised, I went to Chan Guo's house. Using my memories from my past life, I easily earned 2,000 yuan just by helping his father with a small favor. For me, that was a fortune. Lunchtime, I headed back to school, planning to find Sunyanku. His home was far away, so he usually stayed at school over the weekend. I waited downstairs near the girls' dormitory for quite a while, before finally spotting a classmate. Ignoring their shocked expression, I asked them to help call Sunyanku for me. When Sunyanku heard that I was looking for him, he hurriedly slipped on his shoes and ran out. But after sprinting a few steps, he suddenly turned back. He grabbed the bag by his bed and ran out again. It was so cold outside. If Linzhou waited too long, he might catch a cold. Sunyanku picked up his pace. When he finally got outside, he didn't see me. Instead, he noticed a group of girls gathered a few meters away on the left. The crowd was dense. He couldn't see the boy in the middle, but he found it odd. Could that guy be as handsome as Linzhou? Sunyanku seriously tried to recall my face in his mind. After a few seconds of comparison, he decided that, aside from my messy hair, no guy could possibly be more handsome than Linzhou. With that thought, he completely lost interest. He scanned the area again. Where was Linzhou? Hadn't he said he was coming to find him? Just as he was wondering, he suddenly felt someone drape a coat over his shoulders from behind. Sunyanku turned around, and for the first time, he saw a boy who was unbelievably clean and good-looking. His brain went blank. He had no idea how long he stared until he felt a light knock on his head, followed by a teasing chuckle. How can my little desk mate be this silly? Running out without even wearing a coat. It's freezing. Only then did Sunyanku realize, in his rush, he had forgotten to put on a jacket. And in that moment, as I leaned in to drape the coat over him, he could feel my soft, shallow breath land against his face. With a buzz, Sunyanku's brain completely shut down. Panicked, he took a step back, his cheeks turning as red as an apple. I don't need it. I'm not cold, I just said. And yet, the moment those words left his mouth, he shivered. Sure enough, a soft chuckle drifted down from above. Don't be stubborn, put it on. You'll catch a cold in no time. Sunyanku could feel the scorching gaze upon him, as if it was burning him alive. His head dipped lower and lower. I'll go put on a coat right now. Wait for me. Panicked, he wriggled out of my embrace. But after taking just 2 steps, he suddenly realized something. He spun around hastily, flustered. This is for you. He thrust a bag into my hands, then turned and ran off again. He didn't even realize that, draped over his shoulders, was my down jacket. Watching the girl flee, I couldn't help but smile, lowering my gaze. I looked at the pink bag Sunyanku had tossed over. Slowly, I opened it. Inside was a scarf, woven in shades of gray and white. I carefully took it out, examining it closely. A men's style. Could this be a gift from my little deskmate? Scarves like this, hand-woven from yarn, could only be made by hand, which meant it was highly likely that this was a scarf she had knitted for me herself. Meanwhile, Sunyanku had rushed back to the dormitory, leaning against the door, gasping for air in deep breaths. The moment just now with Lin Zhou had nearly suffocated him. He had no idea what had come over him, so he could only clutch at his chest, patting it forcefully as if that could calm the wild thudding of his heart, trying to ease this inexplicable surge of emotion. Sunyanku, why are you wearing a guy's jacket? His roommate's voice pulled him back to reality. Only then did Sunyanku realize he was still wearing my coat. Flustered, he hurriedly yanked it off. He wanted to explain, but he had no idea where to start. His roommate gave him a knowing look. Sunyanku, don't tell me you have a boyfriend? Of course not, Sunyanku shot back immediately, his voice rising a few decibels. His roommate looked utterly disappointed. But before he could press any further, Sunyanku grabbed his own coat, threw on a black down jacket, and rushed out the door. My down jacket was still in his hands. Realizing this, Sunyanku quickened his pace even more. It wasn't until he reached my side that he noticed his heart was still racing. But right now, he had no time to dwell on that. Then he saw me standing there, holding the scarf in my arms. Sunyanku hurried over, thrusting the jacket at me. Put it on, why aren't you wearing the scarf? If you wear it, it'll help keep you warm. It's fine, I'm not cold. How is that possible? Look at your face, it's already turning red from the cold. As he spoke, Sunyanku reached for the scarf. Once I put on my coat, he held the scarf out to me again. But I didn't take it. I just stood there, staring at him. And the longer I stared, Sunyanku started feeling embarrassed again. You've treated me to so many meals, and you give me candy every day. I really didn't know what you might need, so I thought I'd knit you a scarf. I figured since it snowed today, you might use it, but I didn't finish knitting it yesterday, and now it looks like the snow has already stopped. After saying all this, Sunyanku didn't dare lift his head. He hesitantly pushed the scarf forward. Lin Zhou, do you want it? But after waiting for quite a while, Sunyanku realized I still hadn't taken the scarf. A flicker of panic flashed through him. Was it because winter was almost over? Did Lin Zhou not need a scarf anymore? Thinking that, His carefully prepared gift suddenly felt unnecessary. If you don't want it, then I'll just. Before he could finish, I cut him off. Who said I don't want it? When giving someone a gift, you should lift your head, little deskmate. At my words, Sunyanku dumbly looked up. He saw the boy in front of him, eyes shining. Then he heard me say, "Put it on for me." Sunyanku froze. His brain suddenly felt like it wasn't working. For a moment, he didn't react. I said, "Put it on for me." Aren't you giving me this scarf? I'm really cold right now. Help me put it on, okay? Sunyanku instinctively wanted to refuse, but the words got stuck in his throat, and he swallowed them back down. He had never put a scarf on anyone before. Such an intimate gesture felt too difficult for him. But if the person standing in front of him was Lin Zhou, maybe it was okay. After all, Lin Zhou was the one who was willing to give him candy, give him chicken drumsticks and bread, encourage him to study hard, and push him to pursue university. Thinking of this, Sunyanku took a slow step forward. The closer he got to me, the wilder his heart pounded. When he finally stood in front of me, he saw me bend down slightly, lowering my head. My face drew even closer to his. Sunyanku instinctively held his breath. "Don't come so close to me." He could hardly breathe. This feeling, it was really strange. "If you don't come closer, how are you going to put the scarf on me?" The boy's tone was playful, but Sunyanku had no excuse to refuse. All he could do was hurriedly wrap the scarf around my neck. Then, as if startled, he stumbled a step back, as if he had just completed some monumental task. He let out a long breath, and when I saw his reaction, I couldn't help but laugh. Having lived to lifetimes, I had received countless valuable gifts. But this scarf, I considered it the most precious gift I had ever received. Thinking that, I chuckled and ruffled Sunyanku's hair. "It's snowing, want to go for a walk?" Sunyanku hesitated for a moment, then nodded. I walked ahead, and he followed behind me. A few times, I deliberately slowed down, trying to walk beside him, but I noticed that whenever I slowed my steps, my little deskmate would slow his too. But I didn't want to force it. We had only just started getting familiar with each other. There was no need to rush. If I scared my little deskmate away, it would be a total loss. Let's just consider today our first date. Meanwhile, Sunyanku was feeling a little nervous. In all his years, he had never gone shopping with another boy before. The feeling was strange. The air outside was freezing. The cold made him shiver, even though he really wanted to keep wandering around with me. His body wasn't holding up too well. Just as Sunyanku was thinking of an excuse to head back to school, he saw me stop in front of a street vendor's stall. I was holding up a pink and white knitted hat. Looking at him, Sunyanku's brain seemed to short-circuit for a second. "Lin Zhou, are you going to buy that?" I looked at his little red face from the cold and chuckled. "Yes." Sunyanku blinked in confusion. "For me?" Before he could finish speaking, I had already placed the hat in his hands. Sunyanku dumbly took it, his mind feeling a bit hazy. Why would I buy something meant for girls? Was it for a girl I liked? The moment that thought formed, a strange discomfort rose in Sunyanku's chest. He didn't know where this feeling came from. It was just suffocating. Sniffling slightly, he carefully asked, "I might be a bit skinny, so it fits me fine, but for other girls, it might not. You should probably give it to someone else." Before he could finish his sentence, before he could react, I placed the hat directly on his head. Sunyanku's body stiffened instantly. A strange sensation spread from his chest, radiating through his whole body. His mind went blank again. His face burned hot, and even his ears started warming up without him realizing it, seeing him frozen in place. I couldn't help but laugh. Then I picked up a matching, warmer scarf and gently wrapped it around his neck. After finishing, I took a step back to examine him carefully. It suits you well," Hearing my comment, the shop owner, who had been watching nearby, stepped out with a cheerful grin. "You've got a good eye, young man. Your girlfriend looks great in that. And look, your scarves match perfectly as a couple set." As soon as Sunyanku, who had just started processing everything, heard this, he panicked and blurted out, "I am not his girlfriend." But before he could finish, he heard me laugh. "Haha, I think so too." Sunyanku's head snapped up in shock, his wide eyes staring at me in disbelief. "He thinks we look like a couple?" No wonder he had passed by so many little shops along the way, but stopped at this one. But why wasn't he denying it? He clearly wasn't his girlfriend. He should be clarifying it. The shop owner's words snapped Sunyanku back to reality. Forgetting his embarrassment, he quickly grabbed my arm. "Linjo, don't buy it, it's too expensive." But I had already pulled out the money swiftly. "It's fine. You knitted a scarf for me, so I'm getting you a set. It's a perfect match. But I only did that to thank you for all the food you've given me before. And I'll still give you more in the future. If you feel bad about it, then just knit me a matching hat and gloves, too." But winter is almost over. Isn't there always another winter? If not next winter, then the one after that. Life is long. There will always be a time when I can use them. Sunyanku froze upon hearing those words. Why was he suddenly talking about a lifetime? Was Linjo planning to stay with him for a lifetime? No, wait, what was he even thinking? That was impossible. They weren't even a couple. After buying the items, Sunyanku still trailed behind me. He used to hate the noisy streets, but today he barely noticed them. Because right now, his world only revolved around the boy in front of him. After a long while, he gathered his courage and called out to me. "Linjo, why are you so nice to me?" Ever since Sunyanku transferred schools and became my desk mate, he felt like his life had started to change. And all these changes seemed to stem from me. For as long as he could remember, no one had ever treated him this well before. Sunyanku suddenly felt a bit timid. I saw the mixture of expectation and fear in his eyes. A person who had spent his whole life locking himself away, afraid of being touched or getting too close to others. If I pushed too hard, this little thing might just run away. Thinking that, I stepped forward and gently ruffled his hair. "Because we're friends." Sunyanku wasn't entirely convinced. Something about the way I treated him didn't feel like just friendship. Still, he hesitantly asked, "We're friends? Are we not?" "I don't know. I never had friends before." The people who used to approach him, they either wanted him to do their homework, or they were trying to find ways to bully him. Well, now you do. As I spoke, I adjusted his scarf for him. "Me, Liu Shimin, and Qian Guoguo, we're all your friends." Sunyanku still looked unsure. Seeing that, I continued, "Little deskmate, you're not saying you don't want to be our friend, right?" He quickly shook his head. No, I do." "Then try to accept us." "But what do friends even do?" "Friends study together. They eat together. So don't push us away. And remember, if you ever need help, come to us. We'll always be there for you." As Sunyanku listened, a small smile formed on his lips. And with that, we walked back toward the school together. At the school gate, we said our goodbyes. Sunyanku watched my back as I walked away. Then, unable to hold back, he called out, "Linjo!" Today, I was really happy. I've decided which university I want to apply to. I want to take the entrance exam for Nanchuan University with you. There wasn't even a hint of hesitation in his voice. I turned to see him, hands stuffed into the pockets of his coat, and I laughed. After all, I had the advantage of being reborn. Then I'll take the exam with him.